In today's video, I want to go pretty in-depth on the Edge Transit. I know that this video has already been covered by quite a lot of other people, especially as soon as it came out. However, I want to sort of combine all of the different bits of information together into one place for people who might not be aware of all of the different ways that Edge Transit is super good. There's multiple different combinations that I think could all constitute God rolls, so I want to share what those are. So let's go ahead and get into it and have a look at Edge Transit and what makes it so powerful. So after joining quite a few LFGs and just getting familiar with how the community is using this weapon, I've realized that most people are just going with the classic envious bait and switch setup, which is definitely a pretty good setup. However, I don't actually think this is the best roll for the Edge Transit. Now that I've spent quite a bit of time using all three of the different types of Edge Transit God rolls that are out there right now, there's a pretty clear winner to me, and it's not the envious setup, and I actually think it's a combination not a lot of people are expecting. But first, let me tell you what the three desirable God rolls are for the Edge Transit. The first one is obviously the envious and bait and switch setup that everybody knows and has been going for. It's very powerful and it's very easy to use. It does a lot of burst and sustained DPS. It also has decent total damage after the ammo buff to grenade launchers in the last update a while ago. However, there's actually another perk in the third column that can just take it even farther. And that is Cascade Point, and this is a perk on both of the other two God roll combinations I'm going to talk about. And those are Cascade Point mixed with either bait and switch or Deconstruct. And Deconstruct is probably something that a lot of you aren't expecting unless you've already heard about these strats, but basically it is a way to augment Cascade Point very effectively, because it sort of makes up for the two downsides that Cascade Point has. The first one being that Cascade Point only increases the speed that you're doing your damage. It does not increase the amount of overall damage you're doing, you just do it faster, which is very useful on its own. However, when you're comparing it to something like bait and switch, if they're in competition with each other, you typically want bait and switch just so that you're doing more overall damage. But since Cascade Point is in the third column, it's not in competition and you can actually use both. And bait and switch and cascade is a good combo, but talking about Deconstruct, it's really interesting because Deconstruct is basically the opposite of what Cascade Point is. If you don't know what it does, basically Deconstruct requires you to hit a certain amount of hits and it then returns ammo back to the magazine. It is basically triple tap, but it doesn't require critical hits. And the beautiful thing is on grenade launchers specifically, if you have the sticky rounds magazine, your weapon actually does additional instances of damage for whatever reason, and these extra damage instances actually apply to the counter for Deconstruct, so you're getting back a ton more ammo. In fact, it almost doubles the amount of ammo you're getting back. So basically, you just proc Cascade Point, you switch over to the grenade launcher, and when you hold the trigger, you just keep firing and it shoots off at least 10 grenades most of the time. And remember, that's over the course of like 2 seconds. So all you do is you do some sort of instant reload like a grapple or a rain of fire dodge or a hunter dodge or something like that, switch back to a sniper and you proc Cascade again and you just keep going back and forth and you've got a super powerful rotation. And on top of that, by having access to Deconstruct, which gives you such a massive bump in total damage, this roll is also getting more total damage than the bait and switch envious rolls, so it does more DPS and it does more total damage. It is a little bit more effort, but it is definitely worth it in my mind, and it's a ton of fun to get to know. However, it's still a pretty simple rotation. And I alluded earlier that you're also able to do Cascade Point with bait and switch, and this is definitely a pretty strong setup, and if you're doing an extremely short damage phase, then this would definitely be better than the Deconstruct. However, most of the time you're still just better off with Deconstruct because it reduces the amount of reloads that you need on a Edge Transit setup. When you're using bait and switch, even if you have mini frags or something to add the extra shot to the magazine, you still have to do an instant reload every 7 shots, and it can be hard to even have one ready to go that often. Remember, the Cascade Point is only like 2 seconds of dumping to shoot off all these shots, and then you have to have an instant reload ready. And even the fastest instant reload things like Rain of Fire still have a 4-second cooldown. So that's why I wouldn't recommend this for any sort of damage phase where you need more than 1 cycle. But if you are doing a damage phase that's that fast, maybe if for some reason you need a legendary weapon against Atrax or something, it's a terrible example, but that's just sort of an idea that comes to mind as burst DPS. Maybe in the future there will be something that this is more relevant to, but right now I would definitely go for the Deconstruct Cascade with Sticky Nades roll. It's very strong and it is a lot of fun. So to keep this going, I want to sort of explain the differences between the 3 core damage perks that are available on Edge Transit and help you sort of understand how to break down DPS yourself. So to do this, we're going to look at it from a vacuum and basically just pretend that there is no need to reload or reproc, which is obviously silly for an actual analysis of real gameplay damage. However, the point is to understand what the best situations are for this, because you can generally get around reloads if you really need to. So I made a little graphic here explaining what the different perks actually do, but basically you could see that Deconstruct adds 1.8x multiplier to the total damage only, doesn't affect the speed that you do it. Cascade Point is a 1.66x damage multiplier to the DPS, because it reduces the amount of time that you need to spend doing damage. And Bait and Switch adds a 1.3 multiplier to both aspects at the same time. So basically, if your goal is to do damage as fast as possible over a short time, you'd want to combine Cascade with Bait and Switch. If you want to have a lot of both and you can supply a reload fixer, then you would want to use Cascade with Deconstruct. And if you want to have something that's super easy to use and works on any build and doesn't require any sort of help from your class, especially if you play Titan or something where you don't really have access to good weapon DPS setups for reloads, then I would recommend the Envious and Bait and Switch setup. However, remember, it is a lot weaker than if you were to specialize it into the Cascade Point setups. I also want to take a moment to compare grenade launchers with rocket launchers and sort of break down when you should be using each one, because they're both still very powerful for DPS. However, grenade launchers, at least the more specialized setups with Edge Transit, have 100% gone above what rockets can do now. That being said, rockets are still generally very powerful. While grenade launchers might be very good at doing DPS, they're extremely specialized into that. They don't really do a lot of other things very well. However, rockets on their own can tear through almost anything in the game. I still to this day consider Gallowhorn to possibly be the most powerful overall weapon in the game right now, simply because it's able to do everything. It's one of the best ag clear weapons in the game. It's got decent enough damage despite being a support weapon, which also supplies support obviously, and it can still absolutely destroy any sort of majors and smaller bosses in the way. And obviously when you combine this with legendary rockets, it also becomes one of the best DPS choices in the game for an overall team. So now, as long as you're able to hit grenades on the boss, and by that I mean he's close enough for you to not need to worry about the drop, I would absolutely recommend running 5 grenade launchers and a tractor on your raid teams. However, if the boss is farther away and you're having trouble hitting the grenades because of the mixture of the recoil and the drop, you might want to switch to rockets, because if you're missing almost any grenades at all, you're going to be doing worse than rockets. I also still recommend rockets for anything that's not specifically like raid or dungeon DPS. When it comes to clearing GMs, rockets are still the absolute king, especially the high impact frames. When it comes to clearing adds with heavy weapons, rockets are still the absolute king. Pretty much any sort of roam encounter that has like an actual difficult structure, rockets are going to be the absolute king of clearing. Remember, they also have really good ammo economy, and when you mix that with stuff like Cenotaph, which makes a ton of tiny bricks that are then rounded up because of the small reserve of rockets, it makes it very clear that rockets are still the best general weapon. But when it does come to specifically DPS, grenade launchers definitely specialize themselves in making themselves a little bit better than rockets. But hey, I want to know you guys' thoughts, so let me know in the comments, do you guys like rockets or grenade launchers more, and what is your ideal Edge Transit role? Hopefully you learned something from this, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.